I found a green bottle while beachcombing in Santa Monica. I was curious, so I unscrewed the cap and found a long message inside. I sat down on the beach to read it. My name is Joseph Abraham and I'm the only remaining survivor of a shipwreck in the South Pacific. I have set this diary adrift in hopes the world will take heed of the depravity of men who want to rule others. My story began when our ship hit rocky shoals near one of the thousands of small islands in the South Pacific and began to sink. All 10 of us swam to a nearby uninhabited island, but we were unable to recover any survival provisions from the fast-sinking ship. Thankfully, the island had abundant coconut trees and a limited number of gooseberry bushes. On the negative side, fishing was limited due to the waves crashing against the rocks surrounding our island. All of us agreed that parcels of land should be allocated so that each person had an equal number of coconut trees. Property rights were needed to prevent the greedy from picking all the coconuts for himself. 3 of us busied ourselves planting gooseberry seeds on our separate parcels of land for the future. We were frugal with our coconuts, eating just enough to survive on by supplementing our diet with gooseberries and an occasional fish. The other 7 men chose to gorge themselves on coconuts and laze around in the sun. As time passed, the lazy 7 realized they'd consumed most of their coconuts. However, they saw that myself and my 2 industrious colleagues had plenty of coconuts stored in our bamboo huts and that our gooseberry bushes had matured from the seeds we planted. The lazy 7 became envious and concocted a scheme to steal the fruits of our labor. Meeting secretly to discuss their plot, they decided a government was needed to swindle the 3 of us out of our right to life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Ironically, they claimed government was necessary to preserve those rights and promote, quote, the general welfare. Soon afterwards, and over our vociferous objections, they formed a fictional government called the Coconut Island Republic. To complete the hoodwinking, they employed a democratic voting process to select the president. Since myself and my 2 colleagues were in a minority and had no say-so in the election, one of the lazy 7 was elected president. Again, despite our lack of consent to the government, we were assured that we somehow consented to it and were blessed to be citizens of the Coconut Island Republic. Once the president was seated, a flag was hastily sewn from leaves and vine fibers. It was stained with a charcoal drawing of a coconut surrounded by 10 gooseberries. A national anthem was also created to instill a sense of patriotism to the government. Next, a judge was appointed by the president, along with a sheriff, a secretary of defense, a treasurer, a tax collector, a church minister, and a lawyer. The government decided the lawyer would serve the dual role of prosecutor and defense attorney. Thus, the lazy 7 were the real government, and now we were merely subjects and taxpayers. Under the guise of government, they didn't waste time passing their first law, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Political slogans were parroted daily by government officials: social justice, it takes a village, you didn't build that, and change you can believe in. Natural rights to life, liberty and property were never again mentioned. In their place, collective rights, communal property, and eminent domain were the new mantras. The 3 of us objected because a Republican government was supposed to mean we had representatives who looked after our interests. Since their scam was exposed, the lazy 7 renamed the government the Coconut Island Democracy. Majority rules in a democracy, they said, so the representative republic flag came down and the social democracy flag was hoisted. Tax laws followed: income taxes, property taxes, inventory taxes, death taxes, and a surtax on the wealthy. Posters were placed on all the coconut trees encouraging everyone to pay their fair share of taxes. What was fair was determined by the democratically elected rulers. Soon, the government treasury was filled with coconuts, dried fish and gooseberries, all extracted from the citizen taxpayers who worked for it, namely, the 3 of us. The 7 government officials again gorged themselves. Not long afterwards taxes were raised to the point where 92% of our food was demanded. We were told the rich should pay more. The blatant theft of us 3 tax-paying citizens led me to advocate secession. In response to this seditious talk, the sheriff climbed a coconut tree to spy on us. We were labeled dissidents, anti-government, anarchists, suspected terrorists, and a grave threat to democracy and the rule of law. A police state was formed to maintain public safety and defend liberty. All slingshots, spears, and bows and arrows were required to be registered. Then, large-capacity quivers were banned for having no sporting purpose. Weeks later the 7 ruling officials realized not enough coconuts were left for them and the citizens, meaning the 3 of us, so they outlawed the private ownership of coconuts. We were given 30 days to turn them into the treasury or face criminal prosecution. When someone pointed out that we would starve, the president said, "Let them eat gooseberries." However, to prevent a revolt, coconut reserve shells were given to us in exchange for our uneaten coconuts. The government promised to store the coconuts in the treasury and to return a small amount to us upon retirement. A higher authority was cited by the tax-exempt minister to encourage compliance with the confiscation of our wealth. Quoting Romans 13 from the Bible, he advised us 3 to submit to government authority and pay taxes. Our wealth was now in the hands of the government, including our parcels of land. They would be seized if we didn't pay rent to the government, with said rent euphemistically called property taxes. The 3 of us tried to redeem our coconut reserve shell for real coconuts because we were hungry. That's when we found out no coconuts were left in the treasury because the government had consumed them. All we had were the coconut reserve shells, and their only value was to grind into mulch for sustaining the gooseberry bushes. The 3 of us so-called citizens could not survive much longer on just gooseberries, so we petitioned the government for redress of our grievances. The president told us to love it or leave it. One night the 3 of us took down the old flag and hoisted a new one more descriptive of the government's deceptive nature. We used gooseberry juice to dye the new flag with 1 large star and 4 smaller ones to the right of it in the upper left corner. In the center of the flag, we wrote, "The People's Republic of Coconuts." But protest wasn't enough, we had to fight the government or starve to death. We secretly planned an armed revolt, but word got back to the president. To preserve the democracy, he issued an executive order to confiscate all our registered weapons. Then, to put fear into the other 2 citizen dissidents, I was arrested and convicted of sedition. Additional charges were piled on: destruction of government currency by grinding it into mulch, failing to report the conversion of coconut reserve shells into mulch, tax evasion on the increased value of mulch, and the laundering of coconut shells by hiding the proceeds of the criminal activity around gooseberry bushes. I was sentenced to 24 years in the bamboo stockade, plus 3 years supervised release. My sentence also deprived me of a right to vote or own a weapon for the rest of my life. The judge said the harsh sentence was justified because I refused to plead guilty or show remorse. The prosecutor, who was also my defense lawyer, agreed that the sentence was reasonable and proportional to the harm caused to the government. The 2 co-conspirators were spared imprisonment in exchange for testifying against me. Afterwards, the remaining 2 skeletal citizens decided that their only hope was to expatriate in search of a free island. They built a raft from scrounged coconut shells and stocked it with the few dried fish and gooseberries they still had. Unfortunately, they were spotted by the sheriff and told that a new law made it a crime to expatriate off the island with their assets. Their food was confiscated and forfeited to the government. The raft was also confiscated on the grounds that it was an instrumentality of the crime. Mercifully, they were let go with a warning. But upon return to their bamboo huts, they found a government notice that their huts and land had been forfeited to the government under, quote, Admiralty law. The sheriff gave the raft to the government treasury without mentioning the dried fish and gooseberries he kept for himself. Later, 6 of the 7 government officials met for a State of the Island report from the president. The president said, "There is no more food, and we can't take any more from the 2 citizens, not out of mercy, but because they have nothing left." Whispers and murmurs from the other 6 were silenced by the booming voice of the president. "We have only one option, gentlemen, cannibalism." The preacher had a devilish grin on his face, saying, "I can live with that." The president said, "Look, it's no big deal, guys. I read about it happening in the socialist paradises of North Korea and Zimbabwe. In fact, I'm told humans taste just like chicken. One man threw up at the thought. But, since they were government officials, no one expressed any moral qualms at the idea. Thus, an earthen pit was filled with coconut shells and stoked red-hot to ensure thorough cooking of human flesh. At the moment of truth, however, everyone nervously looked around, wondering who tonight's supper would be. The preacher said, "Too bad our taxpayers and the worthless prisoner are down to skin and bones." Grinning, the president turns to gaze at the lawyer. "And speaking of worthless," the quick-thinking lawyer replied, "hold on, guys, I'm HIV positive. You can't eat me." Suddenly, in what appeared to be a stroke of luck, the sheriff came down from his perch in a coconut tree and raced up to announce that a charred piece of driftwood had floated to shore. "It's firewood from another island," he said. "This means they have food." The sheriff held the charred driftwood in the air, pointing to a dead rat stuck to it. He curled his lip into a sneer and announced, "See this rotten, stinking rat here? They're using germ warfare against us to steal our liberty and freedoms." The stunned government officials quickly assembled in the president's Situation Hut, whereupon the president solemnly announced that germ-laden rat is evidence those islanders have weapons of mass destruction. On cue, the Secretary of Defense yelled out, "A military strike is justified." Even the preacher chimed in, "Those naked savages deserve God's wrath." When none of the so-called government servants volunteered for the mission, the two skeletal citizens were drafted. Their confiscated spears, bows and arrows, and large-capacity quivers were returned to them. The frightened Secretary of Defense refused to lead the assault, claiming he was appointed for defense, not offense. But for some suspicious reason, the preacher volunteered to lead the assault. Within the hour, the two emaciated citizens and the preacher climbed into the raft with orders from the commander-in-chief to, quote, "save our God-given democracy from foreign madmen and butchers." They paddled to an island inhabited by friendly natives and slaughtered everyone. Despite all of the men, women and children screaming and crying for mercy, they received none. Thankfully, the minister died from a heart attack while raping a half-alive girl. No rats were found, just a lot of coconuts, dried fish and gooseberries which they seized. These were stacked high onto the raft for the return trip. The two emaciated citizens were given a hero's welcome and a prayer was made for the rapist minister who died serving his country. A banner was quickly strung between two coconut trees that proclaimed, "Mission accomplished." Everyone sang in unison while the national anthem was drummed out on hollow coconuts. The two citizens saluted the flag as coconut medals were pinned to their chest. They were now patriots, warm and secure in the embrace of the collective. One of them tearfully said, "Obedience is bliss." Then both men broke into a chorus singing, "My country, right or wrong, still my country." The next day it leaked that the government lied about weapons of mass destruction in order to seize the resources of another island. Sources said the sheriff stuck the dead rat on the driftwood in order to fool the citizenry. This could never be confirmed since all defense information was suppressed under the Officials' Secrets Act. Not long after the invasion, the Coconut Island democracy collapsed. Once the two tax-paying citizens starved to death, so did the remaining 6 government rulers. I survived thanks to a monkey that brought me pilfered coconuts while I was imprisoned in the bamboo stockade. I dug my way out of the stockade and decided to cast off in the raft to seek a free country. But whether I find freedom or perish in the sea, I hope someone will find this diary and heed my warning to never become a slave to government rulers. The end.
If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and share it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or any social media. If you want to see lots more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. Lots more are on the way.